It was an ordinary evening that did not feel ordinary at all when a single father noticed an elderly homeless man bent over a trash bin searching for food. The man's body was thin and shaking from hunger and cold. His posture looked fragile, like it might collapse at any moment. His eyes were empty and distant, as if his memories had slipped away long ago. The father could have walked past like so many others did. His own life already weighed him down with endless responsibilities. Raising a young daughter alone after losing his wife to a long illness. Bills stacking higher every month, worry sitting in his chest like a permanent ache. Yet something inside him refused to let him turn away. So he stopped, offered the old man a real meal, and then made a choice that would quietly reshape his entire life. That small family, just him and his little girl, opened their door and their hearts to the stranger, welcoming him in like a forgotten relative. They shared what little they had, a warm place to sleep, hot food, and the safety of a roof they themselves struggled every day to keep. The old man tried to give back in every way he could, cleaning when his hands allowed, carrying groceries, helping wipe tables at the small diner where the father worked, never once asking for money or reward. What the father did not know was that the frail man he brought home was not simply a lost soul from the streets. He was someone whose return would change everything. Someone whose forgotten past was quietly waiting to resurface. Evening air carried a sharp chill, mixed with the smell of grilled food and fresh bread drifting from nearby shops. The neon sign of Harbor Street Diner buzzed faintly as Daniel Carter stepped out the back door after finishing his shift. His arms ached from hours of lifting trays and scrubbing tables. Exhaustion pressed into him the way it always did at the end of the day. He still had a long walk ahead to the small apartment where his daughter Lily waited. As he dragged a heavy trash bag toward the dumpster, something caught his attention. A slumped shape near the alley wall, half hidden in shadow. At first it looked like discarded blankets. Then it moved, and Daniel slowed, realizing a man was there. Curled inward and shivering, the old man's shoulders were hunched against the cold, his thin fingers digging through a torn plastic bag filled with crumbs. His gray beard was tangled, his clothes worn and stained. He looked so weak that Daniel wondered how he was still standing. Daniel had seen homeless people before, sleeping on benches or wandering near bus stops. He had never stopped to talk. His late wife used to say they could barely afford their own lives, yet this moment felt different. Maybe it was the way the man's hands shook as he picked up a scrap of bread from the ground, or the vacant blue eyes that stared without truly seeing. Daniel hesitated, then spoke softly, asking if the man was all right. The old man did not respond at first. His gaze fixed on the food. Daniel stepped closer and asked again. This time, the man lifted his head slowly. Blinking as if waking from a long fog, his eyes struggled to focus. After a long pause, he nodded but said nothing. Daniel glanced back toward the diner. Knowing leftovers would be thrown away soon, he told the man to wait. Returned with a warm container holding a burger and fries, crouched down and offered it. The old man stared at the food for several seconds before reaching out with trembling fingers. When their hands brushed, Daniel felt how cold the man was. A quiet thank you slipped from the old man's mouth. Barely audible. Daniel should have left then. Lily disliked when he came home late, but watching the man eat slowly, carefully, like someone unused to food, Daniel found himself unable to walk away. He asked the man's name. The old man frowned as if the question caused pain. He tried to answer and failed, then said he thought his name might be Henry. Sometimes he remembered, sometimes he did not. Some days everything was clear. Other days he woke feeling lost. He touched his head and mentioned an accident. Maybe he had been hit. Daniel listened. Understanding settled in his chest. The man was not only homeless, he was drifting inside his own broken memory. Daniel asked if anyone was looking for him. Henry shook his head, though uncertainty lingered in his eyes. Daniel turned as if to leave, telling himself he had done enough. Then he heard the rustle of fabric as Henry tried to pull a thin blanket tighter around himself. His shaking did not stop. Daniel sighed, made a decision he could not fully explain, and told Henry to come with him. His place was small but warm. Just for one night, Henry stared at him, suspicion and hope mooring across his face. Then he nodded and followed. They walked through quiet streets lit by yellow lamps. Daniel kept his hands deep in his pockets. The cold sharper now, Henry's steps were slow and uneven. His body leaned forward as if carrying invisible weight. Daniel glanced back often to make sure he was still there. Responsibility settled over him unexpectedly. When they reached the apartment building, Daniel hesitated, worrying what his mother would say, worrying about Lily. But he opened the door. The smell of simple soup filled the room. His mother, Ruth Carter, stood at the stove, tired from a long day of cleaning jobs. She turned and froze at the sight of the stranger. Ruth asked who the man was. Daniel explained as best he could, saying Henry had nowhere to go. Ruth studied the old man closely. His sunken cheeks, trembling hands, foggy eyes. Something in her expression soft. She sighed and said she had made extra soup. Invited him to sit. Relief washed over Daniel. Henry moved cautiously, sitting at the worn table. Ruth placed a bowl in front of him. He stared at it as if it were something sacred, then ate slowly, his eyes closing briefly in relief. Ruth asked about his family. Henry said he did not know. She did not push, only offered bread and said he could stay the night. A small voice came from the hallway. Lily appeared in her nightgown. Rubbing her eyes, she asked who the man was. Daniel knelt and introduced Henry. Lily studied him, then smiled and waved, greeting him warmly. Henry returned the smile. Fragile but genuine. In that quiet kitchen under warm light, he was no longer a stranger. He was a guest. Morning arrived softly. Daniel woke to quiet movement, Henry folding a blanket with care, saying he did not want to disturb anyone. Lily burst out asking for breakfast. Greeting Henry cheerfully, Ruth prepared to leave for work, told Daniel to walk Lily to school, and told Henry he could stay during the day. Henry asked if he could go with Daniel instead. Said he felt like he used to work, that he wanted to help. Daniel hesitated, then suggested the diner later. They stood behind Harbor Street Diner. Henry cleaned up and, wearing Daniel's spare clothes, looked almost like a different man. The owner, Susan Miller, eyed them skeptically, joked about collecting strays. Daniel explained Henry needed work. Susan studied him, sighed, and agreed to let him wipe tables. No pay, just help. Henry nodded eagerly, disbelief in his eyes. Inside the diner, the sounds and smells surrounded them. Daniel handed Henry a cloth and showed him what to do. Henry worked slowly but carefully, his focus intense. Customers glanced at him curiously. One older regular seemed to recognize him for a moment, then shook it off. Daniel noticed something stirring behind Henry's eyes, something unfinished. During a break, Henry confessed he felt like he once worked with numbers. Images of offices and screens flashed and vanished. Daniel told him memories take time. That afternoon, Daniel walked home with Lily and Henry. Lily held Henry's hand, chattering happily. Henry listened with quiet peace. At dinner, Ruth asked about work. Henry smiled proudly, saying he did well and was not fired. Laughter filled the kitchen. And for the first time in a long while, Henry felt like he belonged. As days passed, he grew stronger, steadier, and the fog in his eyes lifted in flashes. None of them yet knew how close the past was to finding them again. 3 weeks slipped by quietly. 3 weeks of Henry living under Daniel's roof and working long hours at Harbor Street Diner, each day bringing small changes that were easy to miss unless someone was watching closely. His hands shook less when he carried plates. His steps grew steadier. His back no longer bent quite as deeply under invisible weight. Susan even softened in her own rough way. allowing him one free meal per shift, grumbling that he should not get used to it while slipping extra bread into a bag for him to take home. Regular customers stopped staring and began greeting him like part of the furniture. A familiar presence woven into the rhythm of the diner. Daniel noticed everything. The way Henry concentrated on even the smallest task, wiping tables as if precision mattered. The way his eyes sometimes sharpened suddenly, then faded again, like a light flickering behind frosted glass. Daniel did not push him, did not ask too many questions. Life had found a fragile balance, and he was afraid to disturb it. Lily adored Henry, following him around the apartment, asking endless questions, proudly telling him about school. Ruth watched them with a quiet smile, pretending not to notice how the old man fit into their small family, as if he had always belonged there. Then, one Friday afternoon, the balance shifted without warning. Daniel was behind the diner dragging trash toward the dumpster as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the alley. His foot brushed against a piece of paper. Crumpled and damp from rain, he almost ignored it. Then something made him bend down and pick it up. His breath caught instantly. Staring back at him was Henry's face, younger but unmistakable, printed in black and white above bold words that made Daniel's heart pound violently. Missing Henry Lawson, last seen 4 months ago. Below it was a name Daniel did not recognize at first, Emily Lawson, followed by a phone number and an address in a quiet neighborhood across town. Daniel's fingers tightened around the paper until it creased. His mind racing, Henry had a family. Someone had been searching for him this entire time. Guilt and fear crashed together in Daniel's chest. He burst back through the diner door, scanning the room until he saw Henry near the window, wiping a table, moving slowly but with focus. Daniel called his name, his voice sharp with urgency. Henry looked up, confusion flickering across his face as Daniel handed him the flyer. The diner seemed to fall into a strange stillness as Henry stared at the paper. His hands began to shake violently. His eyes scanned the words again and again. Something inside him snapped into painful clarity. His breathing turned uneven. His fingers clenched the flyer until it crumpled. And when he looked up, the fog that had clouded his eyes for weeks was gone. Replaced by raw recognition, he whispered that he knew the place, that it was his home. His voice no longer distant but firm, grounded. Real. Daniel swallowed hard, nodding slowly, telling him he thought so too. Henry's thumb brushed over the printed name as if it were a key, unlocking something deep inside him. Then he straightened with a sudden strength Daniel had never seen before, and said they had to go, now, without hesitation, without fear. Henry moved toward the door with purpose. Susan watched silently from behind the counter, then waved Daniel off, telling him to go. Daniel grabbed his coat and followed Henry into the street. Knowing nothing would be the same again, Henry walked quickly despite his unsteady steps, clutching the flyer like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Daniel caught up and placed a hand on his shoulder, explaining they could not walk that far, that they would take the bus. The ride passed in tense silence. Henry stared out the window at passing neighborhoods, his lips moving soundlessly as if rehearsing a name he had not spoken in months. Daniel felt the battle happening behind those pale eyes, memories forcing their way back into place when they stepped off the bus. Henry froze, staring down the quiet street lined with well-kept houses. The contrast to Daniel's own neighborhood was striking. Henry whispered that he knew it, that one house at the end of the street was his. He moved forward without waiting, rang the doorbell, the chime echoing painfully loud. Moments stretched. Then the door opened to reveal a woman in her early 30s. Dark hair pulled back hastily, eyes red from crying too often. The second she saw Henry, her face crumpled completely. She whispered, "Dad," the word heavy with months of fear and hope. Henry staggered as if struck, whispering her name, Emily. Then his knees buckled. She rushed forward, catching him, holding him tightly as sobs tore from his chest. Raw and uncontrollable, Daniel turned away slightly, feeling like a witness to something sacred, yet he stayed, unable to leave. Eventually, Henry calmed, leaning against his daughter, repeating her name as if anchoring himself to it. Emily invited Daniel inside, needing to know how her father had been found. The house was warm and refined, family photos lining the walls. Henry sank into a sofa, exhausted but peaceful. Emily asked what he remembered. He spoke a light pain, then nothing, but said the house felt familiar. Tears streamed down her face as she told him she had searched for 4 months, feared the worst. Daniel listened quietly, realizing Henry's life before the alley had been full. Meaningful, whole Emily turned to Daniel with gratitude that overwhelmed him, thanking him for bringing her father home. Daniel tried to brush it off, saying he only did what felt right. But Emily insisted he had saved Henry's life. She learned everything about Daniel's family. His mother Ruth, his daughter Lily, his late wife. 2 days later, she appeared at Harbor Street Diner with Henry at her side, both transformed. Henry clean and standing tall. Susan nearly dropped a coffee pot. Henry introduced himself properly, thanking Daniel openly. The diner filled with murmurs and smiles. Something unspoken shifting in how people saw Daniel. Emily asked to speak with him privately, explaining she wanted to help him the way he had helped her father. Daniel resisted at first, insisting he never expected anything, but Emily offered him a stable job at her company, Lawson Community Ventures, with benefits and security he had never known. She offered Lily a scholarship opportunity. His world tilted, fear and hope colliding inside him. After long hesitation, he accepted, knowing it would change everything. The following weeks felt unreal. Ruth was offered a position at the company as well, her tears of relief flowing freely. Lily was accepted into a school Daniel had only seen in brochures. And Henry grew stronger each day, slowly reclaiming pieces of himself. Emily visited often, staying longer each time, asking Daniel about his life, listening as he spoke about loss and exhaustion, sharing her own grief over her mother's death and nearly losing her father. Something quiet and deep formed between them, unspoken but undeniable. One evening they sat together on the apartment balcony, city lights stretching below them. Emily admitted she never stopped searching for her father. Daniel said he understood. Silence settled comfortably between them. Then Emily confessed that her support was not only gratitude, that she liked being there with him and Lily. Warmth spread through Daniel, but doubts crept in as well, whispers at work. A coworker suggesting Daniel had played the hero for personal gain. The words haunted him, twisting his sense of worth, making him question whether he deserved the life unfolding before him, unable to carry the weight alone. Daniel visited Henry, who listened calmly as Daniel confessed his fears. Henry reminded him gently that kindness given without expectation does not become tainted simply because good follows. That Emily chose her own path, that fear only meant Daniel cared. The words settled deep, loosening something tight in Daniel's chest. That evening, Emily invited Daniel and Lily for dinner. The night was warm and easy, laughter filling the house. After Lily fell asleep, Emily led Daniel outside, the city glowing beneath them. She admitted her feelings openly, honestly. Daniel confessed his own fear and hope. And when they leaned toward each other, nothing interrupted. Their kiss soft but full of promise, marking not an ending but a beginning. 6 months later, Daniel stood in their new apartment, watching Lily race through the rooms laughing, Ruth cooking in the kitchen, Henry arriving with pastries, Emily fitting effortlessly into the life they had built. During dinner, Lily asked if Emily was Daniel's girlfriend. Daniel smiled and said, yes. Lily approved instantly. Laughter filled the space. Henry raised a glass to family and new beginnings. Daniel looked around the table and understood that a single act of compassion had rewritten their future. Not as a miracle, but as a reminder that kindness, once given, has a way of finding its way back multiplied. Life did not slow down after that night. Instead, it gathered speed in ways Daniel had never experienced before. Mornings no longer began with the same heavy dread pressing on his chest. There was structure now, purpose. He woke early to walk Lily to school before heading to Lawson Community Ventures. The building still felt unreal to him, glass walls reflecting a version of himself he barely recognized. A man with a steady job, clean clothes, and a future that extended further than the next bill. Yet beneath that stability lingered a quiet tension, the kind that comes when good fortune arrives too suddenly and the mind struggles to trust in it. Work. Daniel focused on his responsibilities, coordinating youth programs, organizing schedules, listening to teenagers who reminded him painfully of his younger self, lost and unsure. He was good at it, not because of training, but because he understood what it meant to feel invisible. Emily noticed his dedication and praised him openly during meetings, though she remained careful not to show favoritism. Still whispers traveled easily through polished hallways. Daniel caught fragments of conversation, sideways glances, smiles that did not reach the eyes. The unspoken suggestion that his rise had not been accidental. He told himself to ignore it. But doubt is patient and persistent. Ruth flourished in her new role, her posture straighter, her laughter returning. She moved through their apartment with renewed energy, often humming while she cooked. Lily thrived at her new school, coming home with stories of friends and projects and teachers who encouraged her curiosity. Henry visited often, sometimes quiet and reflective, sometimes sharp and insightful as pieces of his former self reemerged. He spoke more about his past now, about long hours in offices, about mistakes and successes, about regrets that surfaced late in life. Daniel listened carefully, absorbing lessons without realizing it. Emily remained a constant presence, stopping by after work, joining them for dinner, sitting on the floor with Lily as they colored or built towers from blocks. Daniel watched these moments with a mixture of warmth and fear. Happiness felt fragile, like glass held too tightly might shatter. One evening after Lily had gone to bed, Daniel finally spoke the worry that had been gnawing at him. He told Emily about the whispers, about the co-worker who implied he had played the role of hero for personal gain. Emily listened without interruption, her expression steady. When he finished, she placed her hand over his and told him gently that people often look for reasons to explain kindness because believing it exists without motive makes them uncomfortable. Her certainty calmed him, but did not erase the noise entirely. The tension came to a head weeks later during a company gathering, a formal event meant to celebrate community outreach. Daniel stood near the back with Ruth, uncomfortable in his borrowed suit, watching Emily speak confidently to donors and board members. Applause filled the room when she finished. And as the crowd dispersed, a man Daniel barely knew approached him with a thin smile and congratulated him on his impressive climb. The words sounded polite but felt sharp. Daniel nodded stiffly. Ruth sensed the shift immediately and guided him away. Later that night, she reminded him quietly that people always talk when they do not understand someone's journey. Her words grounded him, but the unease lingered. Henry noticed too. One afternoon, while they sat together on a park bench watching Lily play, Henry spoke without looking at Daniel, saying success reveals more about others than it does about the one achieving it. Daniel smiled faintly, grateful for the wisdom. Yet the conflict was not only external. Inside him, a deeper fear was forming. Fear that his relationship with Emily would always be viewed through the lens of obligation and gratitude. Fear that no matter how genuine their bond felt, others would reduce it to circumstance. That fear surfaced unexpectedly during a quiet dinner at Emily's home. Lily asleep on the couch, Henry reading nearby, Daniel and Emily cleaning up in the kitchen. The conversation drifted toward the future. Emily spoke about expansion plans, about travel, about long-term goals. Daniel listened and admitted softly that he worried about becoming an accessory to her life rather than an equal partner. The words surprised them both. Emily set down the plate and turned toward him, her expression serious but kind. She told him she had never needed a partner to complete her life, only someone who chose to walk beside her. She reminded him that he had changed her father's fate before either of them knew who the other was, that their connection existed outside titles and resources. The reassurance settled into him slowly. Time continued its steady march, and with it came adjustment. Daniel learned to navigate the unspoken rules of corporate life. Emily learned to step back and let him stand on his own accomplishments. Their relationship grew quieter but stronger, built on shared routines rather than dramatic moments. Lily grew attached to Emily in ways that were simple and honest, bringing her drawings, asking for help with homework, seeking comfort without hesitation. Daniel watched carefully, aware of how easily a child's heart can be hurt. Emily treated Lily with consistency and patience, never overstepping. Always present. Then an unexpected challenge arrived from a place Daniel had not anticipated. One afternoon, he received a call from Lily's school requesting a meeting. Concern tightened his chest as he drove there, expecting trouble or illness. Instead, he was met by polite smiles and careful phrasing. A parent had raised concerns about Lily receiving special opportunities due to her association with the Lawson family. The words stung. Daniel kept his composure, explaining Lily's placement was based on scholarship merit, not favoritism. The administrators assured him there was no action needed. Yet the damage lingered. That evening, Daniel struggled to hide his frustration. Lily sensed it immediately and asked if she had done something wrong. Daniel knelt and told her she had done nothing at all, that sometimes adults let jealousy speak louder than truth. Her trust in him was absolute, and it both comforted and burdened him. Emily reacted with quiet anger when she learned of the incident. Ready to confront the school, Daniel asked her not to, explaining that visible intervention would only reinforce the narrative he was trying to escape. She respected his request, though it cost her effort. That moment marked a shift. Daniel realized Emily was not simply offering support. She was willing to step back when asked, even when her instinct was to protect. The realization deepened his respect for her. As months passed, the noise gradually softened. Familiarity bred acceptance. Colleagues adjusted to Daniel's presence. Donors moved on to new interests. Life settled into a rhythm that felt increasingly normal. One evening, Henry invited Daniel to walk with him. The air cool and calm. They spoke about memory, about identity. Henry admitted there were still gaps he could not fill. Entire years that felt distant, but he no longer feared them. He told Daniel that losing everything had clarified what mattered most. Kindness, connection, humility. Daniel listened. Realizing Henry's journey mirrored his own in unexpected ways, the turning point arrived quietly. Without ceremony, during a community event Daniel organized himself. Number Emily, no Lawson name attached, just local families and teenagers gathering for workshops and activities. Daniel watched from the sidelines as programs ran smoothly, as kids laughed and engaged, as parents thanked him personally. Susan from the diner even stopped by, teasing him about trading grease for grant forms. Pride flickered through him. Earned and undeniable, Emily arrived later. Observing from a distance, her smile filled with something close to awe. That night, she told him she had never been prouder. Not because of success, but because he had claimed his own place. Their relationship deepened after that. No longer shadowed by doubt, they spoke openly about blending their lives carefully, about honoring Lily's pace, about respecting Ruth's independence. Nothing rushed, everything intentional. One evening on the balcony, where they had first spoken honestly, Emily told Daniel she loved him. The words landed gently but firmly. Daniel felt the weight and warmth of them settle into his chest. He replied without hesitation. The fear that once held him silent finally loosened its grip. The season changed, bringing softer light and longer evenings. Daniel often reflected on how far they had come from that cold alley. from a single decision made without expectation. He understood now that kindness does not erase hardship. It invites new ones, but it also builds resilience. Henry's laughter echoed more often through their gatherings. Ruth's confidence continued to grow. Lily's world expanded safely. Emily stood beside Daniel not as a benefactor, but as a partner. And though challenges still existed, they no longer defined the path ahead. Instead, they became markers of growth, reminders that belonging is not granted by circumstance, but built through choice and care. The sense of calm Daniel had begun to trust did not vanish suddenly. Instead, it thinned slowly like mist under morning light, subtle signs appearing before the true weight of change revealed itself. Emily's work grew heavier as Lawson Community Ventures expanded. Meetings stretched late into evenings. Travel dates appeared on calendars more frequently. Daniel supported her without complaint, reminding himself that ambition was not an enemy. Yet a quiet loneliness crept in during nights when Lily slept, Ruth was at work, and the apartment felt too still. Henry noticed first. He always did, sitting across from Daniel at the small kitchen table one evening while Lily colored nearby. He asked gently if Daniel was truly resting or merely enduring. The question lingered longer than expected. Daniel laughed it off at first, then admitted he felt caught between gratitude and fear. Fear that asking for more time from Emily would sound like ingratitude. Henry listened carefully, then told him something that lingered deep in Daniel's chest. He said love that survives only on silence eventually collapses under its own weight. That honesty was not a burden but a bridge. That advice followed Daniel into the following weeks. Emily returned from a short trip visibly exhausted, still smiling but carrying the kind of fatigue that sleep could not fix. They shared dinner quietly, Lily chattering about school, Ruth listening contentedly. Later that night on the balcony, Daniel finally spoke. Not accusing, not demanding, only explaining how the distance felt heavier than he expected. Emily leaned against the railing listening, her face serious and open. When he finished, she admitted she had been afraid too. Afraid that slowing down would disappoint everyone who depended on her. Afraid that choosing personal happiness might feel selfish after years of responsibility. They stood there for a long moment, city lights flickering below. Then Emily reached for his hand and promised they would learn together how to protect what they were building. Not just professionally, but personally. It was not a dramatic resolution. No grand declarations, but it was real. And Daniel felt something ease inside him. Around that time, Henry faced his own reckoning. Memory returned in fragments, sharper than before. Not all of them kind. One afternoon he arrived at Daniel's apartment unsettled. His voice tight as he explained he had remembered decisions he regretted. Moments when work had come before family, when he had dismissed concerns he should have heard. Emily listened quietly as he spoke later that evening. Emily listened quietly, tears forming not from anger but recognition. The past could not be rewritten, but it could be acknowledged. They sat together, father and daughter, sharing truths long avoided. And Daniel realized healing was not a single moment but a series of brave conversations. Susan, from the diner, stopped by one weekend carrying a bag of pastries, claiming she was in the neighborhood and not there to check on anyone. She surveyed the apartment with a critical eye, then nodded approvingly, teasing Daniel about becoming respectable. Her presence reminded him of where he started, of the man he had been wiping tables beside Henry. Humility grounded him in ways success never could. Lily continued to grow, her world expanding with friendships and confidence. She asked more questions now, perceptive ones, about families and why some people live differently than others. Daniel answered carefully, teaching compassion without fear. Emily joined these conversations naturally, never forcing her place, allowing Lily to guide the relationship. Trust deepened through consistency, through showing up again and again. The first real fracture appeared unexpectedly. During a charity gala hosted by Lawson Community Ventures, Daniel attended reluctantly, uncomfortable in formal settings. Emily assured him his presence mattered. During the event, a board member approached Daniel with polite curiosity that quickly shifted toward implication. Comments about opportunity and timing, about how fortunate some people were. Daniel felt the familiar knot tighten in his chest. Before he could respond, Emily stepped beside him calmly, introducing Daniel not as her partner, but as the coordinator responsible for several successful community programs. Redirecting the conversation with ease, the subtle support mattered more than any defense. Later that night, Daniel admitted how much the moment had affected him. Emily listened, then apologized quietly. Not for others' behavior, but for underestimating how deeply it cut him. She promised to be more mindful. Not to shield him, but to stand beside him openly. That might mark a shift. They stopped trying to protect each other from discomfort and began sharing it instead. Change accelerated after that. Emily declined a long-term assignment overseas, a decision that surprised many and drew quiet criticism. She explained simply that growth did not always mean expansion. Sometimes it meant depth. Daniel did not ask her to choose, but he understood the weight of her decision. It strengthened something between them unspoken, but profound. Henry's health required attention next. Lingering effects from his injury surfaced. Moments of confusion returned briefly. Fear flickered across Emily's face when it happened. Daniel stood steady, reminding them both of how far Henry had come. Doctor visits became routine. Life adjusted without drama, just patience and care. Henry often said losing his memory once had taught him not to waste the time he held. Now as autumn settled in, Daniel faced an opportunity that tested his own courage. He was offered a chance to lead a new outreach initiative independently. The role came with visibility and responsibility, and with it the risk of renewed scrutiny. Old doubts resurfaced. He brought them to Emily and Ruth and Henry, expecting reassurance but receiving something better, honesty. They told him fear was expected, that avoiding growth would not protect him from judgment. Lily listened quietly, then declared that her dad helped people, and that was enough. Her certainty cut through every lingering doubt. Daniel accepted the role, throwing himself into the work with measured confidence. Setbacks came and passed. Funding challenges, community skepticism, administrative delays, he navigated them with resilience built from years of survival. Emily watched with pride, offering advice only when asked, respecting his autonomy. Their evenings grew quieter but fuller. Shared meals, shared laughter, shared silences that no longer felt empty. The turning moment arrived during a winter storm. Heavy snow closing roads and halting routines. Daniel returned home early to find Emily and Lily building a lopsided snow figure in the courtyard, Ruth watching from the window laughing, Henry photographing the scene with careful delight. Daniel joined them without hesitation, cold biting at his fingers, laughter warming everything else. In that simple moment he understood something clearly. Happiness was not the absence of struggle, but the presence of people willing to face it together. That night after, Lily slept and the storm muffled the city. Daniel and Emily sat close, reflecting on the year behind them. Emily admitted she had once believed control was safety. Now she understood trust was stronger. Daniel admitted he no longer felt like an outsider waiting to be exposed. He felt rooted, chosen. They did not speak of the future in exact terms. They did not need to. What mattered was the shared direction. As the season shifted again, Daniel felt prepared for whatever came next. Not because life had become easy, but because it had become honest. Henry's past no longer haunted him but informed him. Ruth's resilience continued to inspire them all. Lily's laughter anchored every day. Emily stood beside Daniel not as a symbol of fortune, but as a partner shaped by shared trials. The story that began in a cold alley had not ended. It was still unfolding. strengthened by every challenge that refused to break what kindness had built. The final stretch of the year arrived quietly without fanfare. Yet Daniel felt its weight in every small moment. The way mornings began with purpose instead of panic. The way Lily no longer sensed fear behind his smiles. The way Ruth moved through her days with dignity rather than exhaustion. And the way Emily's presence felt steady rather than uncertain. Nothing dramatic announced that they had crossed into something lasting. It revealed itself gradually through consistency, through shared responsibility. Through the absence of doubt, Henry's recovery continued unevenly, but honestly. Some days his memories flowed freely, other days they stalled. Yet he no longer chased them with desperation. He accepted what returned and released what did not, often reminding Daniel that identity was not a fixed point but a collection of choices made again and again. Watching Henry rebuild himself with humility reshaped Daniel's understanding of strength. It was not dominance or control, but endurance paired with grace. The outreach program Daniel led began showing measurable impact. Attendance grew. Teens returned voluntarily. Parents offered help, and community trust followed slowly but genuinely. Recognition came in modest forms. Thank you notes, quiet recommendations. A local article that mentioned his work without highlighting his personal story. Daniel appreciated that more than applause. It meant he was being seen for what he did rather than how he arrived. Emily remained deeply involved without overshadowing him. Her ability to support without directing became one of the things Daniel admired most. She balanced her leadership responsibilities with intentional presence, declining unnecessary obligations, choosing evenings at home over empty prestige. Some colleagues questioned her decisions, but she did not justify them. She understood now that alignment mattered more than approval. Lily thrived within this stability. Her laughter filled rooms effortlessly. She spoke openly about her feelings, about missing her mother sometimes, about loving Emily without confusion or fear. Daniel listened carefully, honoring each emotion without rushing her through it. Emily followed his lead, patient and attentive, allowing trust to grow organically, never assuming entitlement to Lily's affection. Earning it through presence alone, Ruth watched this evolution with quiet satisfaction. She often said little, but her actions spoke clearly. Preparing meals, keeping routines steady, stepping back when space was needed. She no longer carried the invisible weight of survival alone. She allowed herself rest, friendship, even small joys she had postponed for years. Daniel recognized how much she had sacrificed and made it a point to honor her contributions. Openly, Susan remained a fixture from their past, stopping by occasionally with sarcastic remarks and unsolicited advice. Yet beneath her rough exterior was pride she did not bother hiding anymore. She teased Daniel about becoming respectable, but always added that the diner doors would never close to him. Her presence anchored him to where it all began, reminding him that growth did not require forgetting origins. The turning moment arrived not with crisis, but with clarity. One evening, Henry invited everyone to dinner at his home. Not an elaborate affair, just a simple meal prepared with care. As they sat together, Henry spoke slowly, deliberately, saying that losing his memory had stripped away titles and achievements, leaving only the truth of how people treated one another. He thanked Daniel publicly, not for saving his life, but for seeing his humanity when nothing else remained. The words settled heavily and warmly across the table. Emily followed with her own quiet acknowledgement. She spoke about learning to release control, about understanding that love was not built through protection alone, but through shared vulnerability. She looked at Daniel not with gratitude but with partnership. Daniel responded honestly, saying that he no longer felt like someone waiting to be exposed. He felt like someone who belonged, not because of circumstance, but because of choice. As winter faded and spring approached, change arrived once more, this time welcomed rather than feared. Emily asked Daniel to walk with her through the city park one evening. Lily stayed with Ruth. Henry promised not to interfere. The air was cool, trees budding slowly. They walked without rushing. Emily stopped near a quiet path and spoke plainly. She said she wanted to build a life together intentionally, not rushed, not assumed, but chosen every day. Daniel did not hesitate. He agreed with calm certainty, fear no longer clouding his response. Their decision unfolded naturally. Conversations with Lily were gentle and honest. Lily asked simple questions, offered thoughtful approval. Ruth smiled knowingly. Henry's eyes filled with quiet pride. There was no dramatic announcement, no spectacle. Just alignment settling into place. Months later, they gathered again. This time for a celebration that felt less like an event and more like an affirmation. Friends from different chapters of life stood together. Susan grumbled about formal clothing. Ruth wiped quiet tears. Lily took her role seriously with a sense of joy that drew smiles from everyone present. Henry stood tall beside Emily, his voice steady as he spoke words shaped by loss and gratitude. When he referred to Daniel not as a savior but as family, the meaning resonated deeply. The ceremony itself was simple, grounded in sincerity rather than display. Daniel and Emily exchanged promises shaped by experience rather than fantasy. They spoke of choosing each other in uncertainty, of honoring the past without being bound by it, of protecting kindness as a shared value. Lily watched closely. Her presence, the quiet center of it all. Life after that did not transform into perfection. Challenges continued to appear. Responsibilities remained. Doubts surfaced occasionally. Yet none of them felt destabilizing. They were navigated together with honesty and patience. Daniel often reflected on how differently things could have unfolded if he had walked past that alley. If fear had outweighed compassion, if exhaustion had silenced instinct. One evening long after the celebration, Daniel stood on the balcony beside Emily. City lights stretching below them, Lily asleep inside, Ruth reading nearby. Henry visiting often but contentedly independent. Daniel spoke softly about the randomness of it all. Emily replied that perhaps it was not randomness but readiness. That sometimes kindness creates openings we do not recognize until much later. Daniel held that thought quietly, understanding now that saving someone does not always look like rescue. Sometimes it looks like attention. Sometimes it looks like staying. Sometimes it looks like believing another person matters, even when the world has forgotten them. In doing so, he had not only helped Henry find his way home, he had found his own place within a life shaped by compassion rather than fear. The story that began in a cold alley had not ended with reward or recognition. It had continued through commitment, through resilience, through shared growth. And as Daniel looked around at the life built slowly and intentionally around him, he understood that kindness does not guarantee ease, but it does create meaning, and meaning, once found, has a way of carrying people forward together.